The Bush Center is a place that calls people to a higher purpose and aims to inspire service to others. Laura and I believe that to whom much is given, much is required. This is the spirit that guides our work.
The Bush Center is warm and welcoming. Built on the campus of SMU, my alma mater, we invite visitors through our doors to attend public programming that attracts newsmakers and thought leaders for important conversations around the issues we care most about.
The Bush Center is a unique asset. Having a presidential center and institute combined is something that differentiates us from most of the places around the country. We're able to go where others cannot go and access resources that others cannot access. When we talk, people listen. When we invite, they come. And when we take on a project, we finish it. Guided by the principles of President and Mrs. George W. Bush, we are safeguarding and advancing the values of freedom, opportunity, accountability, and compassion. Rooted in our conservative heritage, we seek to influence policy, not politics. We believe that compassion is the work of the nation, not just the government. And our nation's strength lies in its kindness, courage, and self-sacrifice. As we boldly confront challenges, go beyond theory, and put ideas into action, we show the world America's best. We celebrate the goodness of our nation and look to the future with optimism.
Our mission at the Bush Institute is to engage communities in the United States and around the world by developing leaders, advancing policy, and taking action to solve today's most pressing challenges. Domestically, we focus on creating opportunity for everyone. We support a market economy that provides the best avenue for prosperity for all Americans. We foster opportunity by promoting a fair and robust immigration system. We believe that education is key to economic mobility. We support veterans as they transition from military to civilian life, and we advance women's leadership. Through our Presidential Leadership Scholars Program, we've trained hundreds of rising leaders across the country to be the values-based changemakers of tomorrow. Globally, our mission translates into a simple objective: advancing free societies. We promote a clear vision for America's leadership and why it matters. Our actions promote global health and the drive for freedom, equality, and democracy worldwide. We achieve this not only by focusing on policy and research, but by also putting it into action.
In addition, our convening power is unmatched. We bring people to this great campus and facility and online through our public programming, publications, podcasts, and thought-provoking journals.
We are honored to be on this great campus and be able to partner with the SMU community and its world-class faculty.
Having the Bush Center here is really the crown jewel of the campus. Everyone associated with SMU is extremely proud of it.
When we dedicated the building to the American people, we did so with an unshakable faith in the future of our country.
George and I are grateful for the generous support of individuals and organizations that have helped us ensure that the Bush Center will serve our nation and the world.
We've had a great start. Now we must make sure our mission endures for generations to come.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mrs. Laura Bush.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all very much. Thank you. I haven't even said a word yet, but thank you very, very much. Welcome to the Bush Center. Thank you for joining us tonight, whether in person or virtually, for our Engage program, sponsored by Highland Capital Management. We've updated a part of the museum with a new exhibit called Protecting the Environment, and a heartfelt thanks to the generous supporters who made this new comprehensive and interactive exhibit possible. Lyda Hill, the Fondren Foundation, Sturgis Charitable Trust, the Strake Foundation, the Hoblazel Foundation, the Holloman Price Foundation, and Trammell Crow with EarthX. Thank you all. For those joining us in person tonight, I hope you'll have a chance to take a sneak peek at the exhibit after the program. And for those of you tuning in virtually, I have good news for you. The Bush Library and Museum will officially reopen on May 25th, so I invite you to come see us in this new exhibit then. We have a special program this evening, one with a subject that's near and dear to my heart, a commitment to conservation. I've been inspired by the naturalist in my life. As an only child growing up in West Texas, my appreciation for our nation's natural landscapes started early and came from my mother, Jenna Welch, who, if she was not reading, could be found outside. My mother was a knowledgeable, self-taught naturalist who remembered the name of every wildflower and was a passionate bird watcher. For as far back as I can remember, on spectacular summer nights, Mother would grab a blanket and we'd go to lie outside on the ground and gaze at the sky. Midland, of course, has a huge sky, uninterrupted by trees. Midland's motto is, "The sky's the limit." Imagine growing up in a town with that motto. Maybe that's why Midland produced 2 presidents. As my mother and I would lie together on the hard grass, she would say, "Look up, Laura, look up." And it was then that I began to look up as to not miss the beauty of the world around me. Since then, conservation and protecting our natural world has remained a constant in my life. I've hiked in a national park with my childhood friends every summer for the last 30 years. As First Lady, I advocated for the protection of our lands through the National Park Foundation. In 2007, after President Bush established Papahanaumokuakea as the National Marine Monument, I had the chance to visit. Papahanaumokuakea is in the Pacific, about 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii. It's a stretch of coral islands, seamounts, and banks, home to a diverse collection of birds, fish, coral, and marine mammals, many unique to the Hawaiian island chain. In 2016, President Obama expanded Papahanaumokuakea, making it the largest marine conservation area in the world. And as you can see when you tour the exhibit, many world leaders have followed, protecting their marine areas as sanctuaries. When George and I moved back to Texas from Washington, I helped found Texan by Nature with a group of friends and committed conservationists. You'll hear from our leader, Joni Carswell, in just a few minutes. Today, George and I are working to restore about 100 acres of the prairie at our ranch in Crawford. And we've developed a native Texas park right here at the Bush Center. But the Bush Center sits on a 15-acre restored prairie that showcases the natural, native environment of our home state. George and I worked with Michael Van Valkenburg to landscape the grounds with the native prairie grasses that once flourished right here in this part of Texas. We've planted nearly 930 trees native to Texas, including pecan, Texas redbud, live oak, chica-pin oak, and Eve's necklace. Along with these native trees, the grounds feature an amphitheater, a mile-long walking trail, a wildflower meadow, and a 250,000-gallon underground cistern that collects all the storm runoff from our building, even from the parking lot, and repurposes it to irrigate our native Texas park. Efforts to develop parks in the heart of a city like Dallas are increasingly important, as about 80% of our nation's population now resides in urban areas. Exposing more urban dwellers to the natural beauty of our country is critical to maintaining the integrity of our unique natural heritage. While my interest in conservation has been lifelong, I'll be the first to say I'm still no expert, but Lyda Hill is. Lyda is known for tackling problems that are bold, complex, and what most of us would call impossible. She's always in search of global, life-changing solutions. Lyda generously supports countless initiatives from food security and safety to medical research and public health. But conservation holds a special place in Lyda's heart. She supports urban green spaces and water conservation. Her Lyda Hill Philanthropies has awarded grants to fund a variety of environmental and marine conservation efforts being conducted by the Nature Conservancy and the Pew Charitable Trust. And without Lyda's support, we wouldn't have been able to update the Protecting the Environment exhibit here at the Bush Library, which we hope will educate visitors for decades to come. So now I'd like to introduce a real conservation expert, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and a true Renaissance woman, Lyda Hill. Join me in giving her our heartfelt thanks and a warm welcome.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that kind introduction. We share a commitment to conservation, and I've enjoyed the pleasure to work alongside you to help conserve this beautiful world we enjoy. It's wonderful to be here with all of you tonight to launch the refresh of the Protecting the Environment exhibit. Earlier this week, I had the opportunity to see it and enjoy seeing what was done and what was improved. As some of you know, I've had my hands on museums every now and then, and it reminded me, though, of the policy, of what policy can play in change, because I really have never dealt with that. The number of square miles of ocean that was protected during President and Ms. Bush's time in the White House is simply astounding. The work set the stage for some things that I was involved with. The most well-known conservation organizations, the Pew Charitable Trust and the National Park, the Nature Conservancy I've worked with on land and in the ocean, and they influence policymakers around the world to conserve and protect large swaths of the ocean by creating a series of large marine protected parks. I got the logo after a while. The MPAs was the marine protected areas. It's been a joy to be able to support these efforts through my philanthropy, and I'm very grateful that the Bushes to bring this strategy to the mainstream discourse, because that wasn't happening among ocean conservationists. I can tell you from firsthand experience, I've done a lot of snorkeling in the oceans of the world, and where things are being conserved, the fish are big. I'd gone along Sulawesi snorkeling every day, and there were these little bitty fish. And then we got over to the protected area, and I'd jump in, and all of a sudden, there's a big fish. It sort of took me back, surprised me. The exhibit really resonated with me when I picked up a 3D printed ship. They have 6 different items like this one. Now let me explain to you that and I was playing with them over there this afternoon. This part of the exhibit included an interactive screen, and so you activate the screen by putting the ship down or the other objects. There's a frog and there's a fish, and you put the 3D down and you move it around, and it triggers this screen that then tells you about different parts of the ocean. And we had great fun playing with it. You'll enjoy it. Make sure you want to have time to play with that. But these 3D printed, they're printed from recycled materials. Is that amazing? The fact that the team here was conscientious enough to make sure that they were environmentally friendly, I thought was pretty impressive when they were creating the exhibit. Anyway, using the 3D ship brought me back to a mixed technology time that I supported ocean conservation. The Pew Trust came to me and said, Lotta, we've got this idea to be able to stop the ships that are illegal fishing. We can now use satellites to find them because they have transponders on them. And the strategy works beautifully to catch the bad ships. And I have actually been in the Situation Room in London and seeing this huge board with the oceans and all these little lights going across it where the ships are going. And one of them was orange, and these people are sitting in this there, and they pick it up and they go, oh, okay, I'm going to track that one. That one doesn't belong there. It doesn't belong there. And so from the screen, they can contact the representatives in the first country we worked with was actually Chile, and they could contact them and said, you got a ship at so-and-so and such a lunch, and, oh, it just turned right. And, and so they could stop them around the world. It's really fascinating. Another part of the exhibit that really resonated with me was the interview of Sylvia Earle. She is in one of the exhibits, and if you're not familiar with Sylvia Earle, she is the preeminent ocean explorer of our time, and she goes by the name of Her Royal Deepness, because she spent so much time under the ocean. She is one of the only women to be a National Geographic Explorer in residence, and she had that title for nearly 25 years. In the video, Sylvia says, and I want to quote this, leaders have the authority to embrace the ocean and its assets, to keep them in the bank, not just be a witness of this constant decline, but to do something about it, to reverse the trend. And the quote really struck me because that's what we all as leaders, our responsibility when it comes to conserve things, not just leave them as they are. We all have a role to play in that. It also reminds me about the time that I supported some conservation in Indonesia, and they took me where they had, each village had given a young man to help catch the bad ships and move the bad ships on when they were in areas where they didn't belong. And so after they were telling us about it, I turned to my translator and said, could you please ask that cute young man, he seems to be smiling and so happy. Why is he so happy? And she says, and he said to me, his reply was that he knew that what we were doing would be help him feed the people in his village. That gets you just don't forget things like that. Anyway, if you've enjoyed being in the ocean or swimming or even drinking clean water or breathing clean air, you can find a way to use your position in the world to lead, to improve, and to protect our environment. We all have to see what we can do about that. Sylvia's quote also struck me because it reminded me that I had her in Dallas in 2019, where she communicated a similar message to a group of 100+ women as part of my office's If Then initiative. And Ms. Bush was there with us and that night, and Sylvia inspired the audience to do more to protect the environment. Actually, I saw Sylvia this week at Dallas. Well, actually, it was a 3D statue of her, life-size, over at the new exhibit with the most statues of women that have ever been anywhere in the world at North Park. And if you haven't been, please go and see the 120 of, we call them ambassadors, who are in STEM fields, and they're from all over the United States and Puerto Rico. And we have this display of them, and they're all orange, they're all life-size, and it was quite stunning when I met me. It was quite a stunning event when I saw me. But I know that this exhibit will inspire the young girls to go into STEM. We need everybody to help move us forward. We can't take the oceans for granted. And I know that President Bush considers the Bush Institute not just to be a think tank, but to be a do tank. Well, that's kind of the way I work, and I can hardly wait to see the stories that after people see the new exhibit, the ocean exhibit, what they're thinking, and then what they might go do. Because the people who come here are people that can do things. The exhibit shows the change that requires champions. People like President and Ms. Bush and Sylvia Earle are two champions of our environment. We'll hear from a few more environmental champions this evening, and let me introduce them. We will hear from Jim Connaughton, where is he? Who served as the chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality under President Bush. We'll hear from Texas by Nature CEO and President Joni Carswell. Works closely with Ms. Bush to bring together leaders in industry and business conversations to change Texas. In our office, we really believe that solutions come by having business and society working together to make things happen, and she's leading the charge in this area. We'll also hear from my friend, EarthX Board Chair and CEO, Lynn McBee, who will serve as a moderator. Of course, Lynn needs no introduction to this group. She has a long history of community service, and her family goes back to the early days when Texas, I think, was just wild country here. But she's supported many conservation organizations, and I know we're going to have a really thought-provoking conversations discussion. So, Lynn, take it away. I can't remember where Lynn is.
Thank you, Lada, for that introduction. Jim and Joni, it is wonderful to be with y'all tonight, moderating this panel. I'm very excited. During our practice, we sketched out some questions, and we decided we'd rather have a 2-hour chat because we had so much to talk about. But we're going to do this in about 42 minutes, and so let's get going. I wanted to start by asking our panelists just kind of something personal. What was your first connection with nature and conservation, Joni?
So I actually don't remember a time when there wasn't a connection with nature and conservation. I had the good fortune to grow up on a hydroponic produce farm. So we grew everything organic, and our family grew our own food, we composted, we hiked all of the state and national trails, and really lived by the mentality of leave no trace. And so I like to say we were granola before granola was cool. My staff informs me granola may not be cool now, but I'll just leave that on the table.
Oh, wonderful. And Jim?
Well, I'm privileged to be the son of Irish immigrants, and when we came here, we lived in a little teeny tiny house with a little teeny tiny yard with a massive forsythia bush. And the way the bush had grown so big, the inside was hollow. And there were 5 of us, we spent hours inside of that forsythia bush during the daytime and the nighttime, and it was a cave, and it was a forest, and it was it was an adventure land in the mountains. It could have been anything, and then of course come summertime, it was all aglow with the fireflies, and so just hours just doing nothing but being there. It was kind of the earliest memory that I can recall, and fondly with each other in the environment as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So from the beginning. Yeah. So we know that President and Mrs. Bush have done so much in conservation, and I'd love for you each to share your relationship to the work, the very important work that they've done and you've done yourselves.
Absolutely. Well, I have the good fortune, as Mrs. Bush mentioned, she founded Texan by Nature 10 years ago this year, actually, and I have run the organization since 2017 as the CEO. And this organization, as you can imagine, it embodies who she is. It is thoughtful, it is inclusive, it is far-reaching and visionary, it's collaborative in bringing all groups together, whether it's conservation nonprofit, whether it's industry, whether it's government. We are working to advance conservation as a whole and fill the gaps that are out there for the conservation groups that are doing incredible work every single day, which who better to represent that and build trust than Laura Bush? She opens doors for us and speaks and shares her vision from a space of example, all the way back to when she grew up, to what she did at the White House, to the example she has set here at the Bush Center and on her own ranch. And we take all of those best practices and we share them, and we work with the groups every single day to advance conservation across the state of Texas and set up a new model of collaboration to create deeper impact moving forward.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Texans by Nature a little bit later, but you, 8 years with the president.
So actually, I guess you could call it 16 years 16. Because although I did not know him then, I worked with his people. The president, when he was governor, was very involved in the whole regulatory reform movement of how do we advance the economy and advance environmental protection rather than have that be at some kind of a trade-off. And he initiated something called Clean Industries 2000, which was a watershed activity, and that's what attracted me to then Governor and soon to be President Bush, was that he was doing it in Texas. And while lots of folks were talking about it, it was actually happening in Texas, and that was really inspirational to me at a time when I was much younger and had a lot more hair. And that's how I became active in the campaign, and that was sort of a treasured time. And then, lightning strikes with the encouragement of Margaret Spellings, of course, and I ended up with this great job in the White House. And I want to underline sort of two things about that. When I started, of course, I was scared and nervous. It's like a first meeting with President Bush, and of course he got right to the point. He says, "Jimmy," of course all the Texans called me Jimmy, and he said, "Jimmy, we're not here to play small ball." He said, and that was it, and he was like, "Okay," and by the way, the hallmark of 8 years was that point, which was the expectation, the desire, and the commitment to bring me big ideas. Don't bring me little ideas. And the arc of the campaign, the work from Texas, was all about, and these big ideas, it always had as its end point, people's place in the natural world. And that was also important. It wasn't environmental protection for environmental protection's sake. It wasn't environmental protection for the sake of people's recreation. It was about people in the world. So every policy we worked on, and every speech we did, it was always great to be with him to rewrite the speech, because the speechwriters kept forgetting to put people into the equation, and his entire focus was on that. And that carried all the way through. And so, for me, it got bolder, bolder, bolder. But the second piece I want to underline was just how cool it was to work on these issues with Mrs. Bush. And I remember the first trip on her plane, bringing a book out, showing the pictures of Midway, in the location soon to be the big Marine National Monument. And she was with Reagan Gammon, and we were looking at the book, and there was just nothing more heartwarming than going from picture to picture with Mrs. Bush going, "This is so cool." And it was, and that was the catalyst for all that followed.
Oh, those are wonderful stories. So our topic tonight is a commitment to conservation, and we heard Lyda talk a lot about the oceans, but there is so much in the realm of conservation, land and ecosystems, and so I'd like for you each to kind of reflect and tell me how you define conservation. And Joni, we'll start with you.
Sure. So I don't have to tell this crowd, but I want to start with conservation is critically important. It's important to our future. Our health depends on it. Our economy depends on it. Texan by Nature was founded on the premise that our prosperity and our long-term health are dependent on our natural resources. And so we define conservation broadly. It's the efficient management, it's the restoration and replenishment of our natural resources. And that's what we work to do each day. It's not about saying, don't touch this, don't use this. It's about thinking about, you mentioned humans and how that interaction takes place, not conserving for the sake of conserving. It's about our long-term future. And we don't look at a particular water or land or wildlife species. We look at, as a whole, we have one world, and we need to work together and look at new processes and innovate on ways that we interact with that world so that we can all continue to prosper in the way we do today, and even more so than we do today. So broadly defining conservation as that efficient management and that replenishment, almost the circular economy type definition of conservation, is how we look at our projects and how we interact with our partners at Texan by Nature.
Yeah, and Joni and I share that perspective. I try to crystallize it to the expression of communities in community with nature. Yeah. Because as you think about conservation, it is not and can never be the act of an individual, and certainly my experience through my whole career, there's nothing achieved of consequence that didn't entail, a cast of thousands or tens of thousands sort of organizing around a collective ethic, and then collective action, and then sustaining that stewardship going forward. And as importantly then, when communities are engaged, as they must be to have thriving and healthy communities, there's a whole different way of thinking about government's role in that context. And government can be empowering in that context, or government can be wildly distracting. And so I tend to favor the empowering end than the wildly distracting end.
Yeah. So based on your experiences, what are some of the things that NGOs and citizens and corporations, and what can everyone do? I mean, you're doing the work, you're looking out for the whole, you're talking about, the circular economy, and so what are things that you can identify that each of these groups, because there's a lot of us and we all want to be pushing towards how we can be most effective in this area?
Yeah. So it's interesting, if you zoom out, I don't know if any of you are fans of Marcus Lemonis. He looks at things from an industrial engineering perspective, as do I. I have an industrial engineering and operations background. But if you zoom out at the broadest level of what makes industry and entrepreneurs successful, it's 3 Ps. It's focusing and diligently narrowing in on people, product, and process. And I like to add a 4th P, which is place. And so if you look at conservation through that lens, you as an individual, you as a community leader or a community as a whole, you as an industry leader, you as a government entity, there are ways to conserve for each of those levels through your people and how you utilize your resources, through your processes, through innovations and technologies like at Rice Tech, where they're using technology to use less water to grow rice than ever before. Dell Technologies, where they are taking recycled laptops and utilizing that recycled material to create their new laptops instead of virgin materials. Through their processes, putting it into their products and offering products in a new way. And then you're seeing more and more partnerships between these industry leaders and these government organizations and the conservation nonprofits in really expanding that thinking to place. And if you apply that analytical kind of engineering mindset to and how you manage profitable business, you're going to see conservation escalate. And you're seeing initiatives where each person can get involved today very easily in water conservation. Plant native landscapes, that's something we can all do for landowners and homeowners, or even if you live in an apartment and can do monarch habitat in your balcony. You can recycle. You can not use single-use plastics. You can turn out your lights at night and help migratory birds and protect our dark skies. So in each of those, they're part of that people, product, process, place, and we can all participate at each level of how we live each day.
Those will be good things to take: people, product, place, and
industrial engineer.
There you go. I'm biochemistry, so I think almost along those lines.
Sounds like you also have the MBA.
Exactly.
Put it on top
Jim,
of it.
So Jim, please, and also, we might talk a little about Nautilus. I don't know if you'd want to bring that in.
I'll wire that in a second. I want to build on Joni's point. We went sideways as a nation and actually globally when we began to really care again about conservation and stewardship. It's had its ebbs and flows in the arc of humanity. But we went sideways when we said we're going to park this in the hands of the specialists and the environmental groups and the universities. And then all the universities grew environmental departments. And the whole thing got siloed into its own, let them take care of it. Okay? Mistake. Okay, mistake. And we have grown out of that, which is, and I would tour these universities and they'd say, let us show you our new environmental department. And I'd say, what's everybody else doing? Or I'd go to a factory. I used to do environmental management systems, a lot of Texas factories actually. And I'd meet with the plant manager. I'd say, could I please meet your environmental engineers? And I'd get introduced to the two folks in the trailer writing permits. And I'd say, well, what are the other 200 engineers doing? And this goes to Joni's point. Environmentalism and conservation works when it's integrated into your way of being, and therefore it accomplishes much more. Thanks for asking about Nautilus. So I've always been, I favor free market environmentalism, and by that I mean profitable environmentalism. Because if it's profitable, it's likely to happen everywhere. And so if we can find big leaps forward that can be achieved with better economics, I like to focus on that, big outcomes. And what we are doing is green data centers. So I'm the CEO of a company, and we got our heads together. And you will not know this, but if you hold up your phone, every one of your phones is consuming about a household worth of energy back at the data center, believe it or not. And every one of those phones, every day, by the way, every one of those phones every day is consuming about 50 gallons of drinking water per device per day back at the data center. And using chemical refrigerants that deplete the ozone layer and actually are potent greenhouse gases. And so data centers are fundamentally important to creating the computing that helps us identify sustainability, and yet they're a sustainability nightmare. And so what we said is, this makes no sense. How can we make data centers more harmonious with nature? And it turns out, if you use naturally cold water to cool the computers, instead of all this manufactured cooling that engineers want to do, you can actually have water, naturally cold water, be the solution to the water consumption problem, right? So that's kind of cool. And so, and we built the first one. It's real, it exists, and so we can actually continue to close the digital divide and bring digital services to people around the world and dramatically reduce the footprint. Not a little bit, it's 70% less energy, no water consumption, no wastewater, no chemicals, no refrigerants, smaller footprint, and here's just the killer app of the whole thing. We moved the data center from commercial real estate land, and you see them are here around Dallas, actually, and we put them in the brownfields. We convert the brownfield to a greenfield data center, create great tech jobs for people that really could use them, and we repurpose the stuff that created a problem and now make it a solution. So it's an ESG machine, and I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah. Joni, what other ESG machines have you seen? Because you work a lot with corporations, and so this is very exciting, and I think it's, letting the market and letting consumers drive it. And we'll talk a little bit about regulation next, because I think this is a way that maybe we don't let regulation drive some of our decisions. It's more from the business perspective.
So first, thank you, and congratulations on an amazing solution. We're seeing fantastic ESG machines in every industry. We, in 2019, actually started recognizing the Texan by Nature 20, which is the best industry partners across 12 industries doing innovative conservation work. And so we're seeing things like rotational grazing from cactus feeders. We are seeing, I mentioned Dell Technologies, we're seeing reduction in flaring, water conservation, playa restoration, dark skies from many of the oil and gas operators that are operating in Texas. That includes, Pioneer Natural Resources is a real leader in that, as is Apache Corporation and Marathon Petroleum, who are putting all of their engineers, not just their environmental department, but all of their engineers, and they're setting up performance standards for raises each year based on meeting ESG goals. And when it's going back to your paycheck, you see real innovation and you see real results, which is exciting. But beyond that, we're seeing a lot of new interest in building on, the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a standard, setting ESG goals based off that framework. But what I'm really excited about is more and more of these companies that are intensive natural resource users are looking to local conservation groups and conservation experts to do more on-the-ground projects to achieve those goals. So they're looking at their own processes, they're looking at their own products, they're looking at their own people, but they're also going out to the places where they operate to make change. And a great example of that, we recently announced the Texas Water Action Collaborative, which is modeled loosely after the California Water Action Collaborative, but you mentioned, no small ball, and it's all do, and action. The Texas Water Action Collaborative is based on action, and we've had Molson Coors, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Frito-Lay, Limonatek all come to the table. And what they're trying to do is work with the local conservation groups and put their money into that conservation, the projects that are proven to increase water quantity and water quality. So it's funding these proven methods of conservation, and then they'll report back on their ESG goals in that way. And so through that partnership, you have government organizations like the Natural Resource Conservation Service involved, water districts, North Texas Municipal Water District, Tarrant Regional Water District, the corporations that I mentioned, and then about 30 conservation nonprofits that are submitting projects that need funding. And so we're working with that entire group to prioritize what will be the biggest impact for the area and what will achieve the goals that the corporations have set forth. And that, to me, is the future, that collaborative setup, and that is what a real ESG machine will be defined, moving forward, and it's exciting.
So corporations are looking to NGOs.
They are.
That are on the ground, that are knowledgeable, to help them solve the problems. Because so often you think about corporations coming and I want to give you, something to do something, but really coming for the expertise and implementing projects and plans that all the NGOs already have. So it's exciting.
Yeah.
So Jim, a little bit about, we started to get a little into kind of the market, and do we regulate or do we let the market-based economy and some of these new technologies, and it's a combination of both. We were just talking in the green room about, if you don't regulate and you don't have these plans, then you're really not going to be able to achieve very big, broad goals. So talk a little bit about, we can do all these great initiatives, but regulatory-wise.
Yep. There's always going to be a role and a necessity for policy. And policy can have many forms. A good friend of ours is Mike Leavitt, and he had this philosophy for the Western governors that then Governor Bush was also part of, called In Libra. But it begins with two fundamental principles, which I love, which is when it comes to conservation of the environment, markets before mandates. But if you have to have a mandate, make it market-based. Okay, and if you just apply those two, you can accomplish so much. The dearly departed President George H.W. Bush did the acid rain trading program, which at the end of the day, it wasn't really about acid rain, okay, letting you in on a secret. It was really about dramatically cutting the air pollution that puts kids in hospitals, with asthma, who have asthma, and it triggers asthma or causes, real problems for older people with respiratory distress. Well, the acid rain program protected trees, but it really protected people. But it did it by setting a specific legislated goal and said to the private sector, we're going to count, but you figure out how to meet it. So created a counting system, not a mandatory system, by which the companies were able to basically trade emissions to see who could more cheaply reduce the emission and for whom was it going to be harder. And so this created this virtual market, and it slashed the cost of compliance. Fast forward to our other great Bush president, President George W. Bush, and in 2007, we passed legislation. George W. Bush, Nancy Pelosi, and Harry Reid sharing the same stage, believe it or not, with the biggest carbon mandates in the history of the world then, and still now. And my favorite mandate, and it's a mandate, and it's okay for Republicans to say mandates, okay? So if you're out there, a mandate's okay if it's smart. A dumb mandate is not good. And this was a smart mandate. The mandate was about lighting efficiency. Okay, so the US said, we've got to move beyond incandescent lights. They're wasteful, they consume a lot of energy, they contribute a lot of greenhouse gases. And how do we create a signal for innovation? So this mandate said, all lighting shall be 70% more efficient 10 years from now. That was it. And it said, therefore, all lighting manufacturers, as you sell into the American market, your products have to get that much better over 10 years. 10 years was enough time to innovate, enough time to raise the money to build new factories, enough time to work with the architects and figure out new modalities in marketing so consumers would like these things, enough time for us to move beyond only compact fluorescence, which everybody hates, to other models. And so in 10 years, and by the way, then the Tea Party Republicans came in, and they shut down all the government funding for this, okay? Because even though most of them voted for it, they then shut down the funding for it. But because it was a legislated mandate, it was the law of the United States of America, and the corporate world said, well, we got to comply with the law. So with $0 federal dollars and 0 federal employees, the private sector figured out how to get from where they were to 70% better in 10 years. It happened invisibly. LEDs are everywhere. The price collapsed by 10x. And because of the American, and by the way, and factories were made in America to make these lights rather than importing them from abroad. They're much less wasteful material-wise. But because of this mandate, LEDs are saving the United States over $2 trillion on their electricity bill. Okay? And that goes right into people's pockets. It goes into more taxes and revenues for the government. And as a result of this, the rest of the world is buying LEDs instead of incandescents without a mandate. So just that one signal from America, and that's a 70% reduction in the lighting bill of the world.
Wow.
Okay, one step. You didn't hear about it because it just happened. It was invisible. It was innovation. It was the corporations and the supply chains making it happen. And now the architects are going crazy and they're giving us every kind of light you can imagine, right? And when before we were stuck with the one. So that's where there's a power of doing smart policy combined with unleashing market forces.
Yeah, market forces, smart. So how do we get citizens, people, how do we get them engaged? And so we've talked about business, but it's a mind shift. It's a different way of thinking when you were talking about, just the environmental engineers were going to work on the project. But how do we get everybody engaged in the game? And it is about public education. It's about great exhibitions like we saw right before now. But what can everybody out here do? And what are some of the things that you're seeing that are really effective and working and changing people's thought in this topic? Would you like to go, Joni?
Sure. Who's going to go first?
Joni?
So we're seeing a lot of success with social media, of course, and really working through the local groups to get message out and have coalition building around iconic species or iconic issues. And I'll use the monarch butterfly as an example. There are probably 30 organizations working in Texas alone on the plight of the monarch, which has broadened into the plight of the pollinator. And through those organizations, individual citizens can be recognized if they just plant one milkweed. They can, be certified by different organizations. So offering that carrot and that attaboy, attagirl on getting involved and making them part of a broader conservation community around a specific initiative. We're seeing a lot of progress on that front. But again, as I mentioned at the front, social media, we saw a huge uptick this spring on the Lights Out initiative across Texas. So we worked to bring 40 different conservation organizations, mainly local Audubon chapters, and then Texas Audubon, Texas Conservation Alliance, Cornell University, many others, Defenders of Wildlife, and then multiple city offices together to create a unified, consistent, standard campaign. And in using the same imagery, the same dates, the same message, the same FAQ, we saw a tremendous increase in lights out and proclamations from 13 different cities and across all the neighborhood channels and social media. The same things being shared. And it's just a lesson, Jim said, it takes that community within a community, but bringing all of those groups together and everyone working on that consistent message is what really makes the difference in public education. Because prior to this spring, all those groups were doing lights out, but the imagery was different, the message was different, the dates may or may not have been on there. And in just bringing it together and having one standard, huge voice across the state of Texas, we've seen a tremendous uptick in residential areas, and we expect to see even more in the urban real estate and the tall buildings in the fall.
So again, let me build on that. So I've put things into three categories. One is acting locally, and that's meeting people where they are. And I think Lyda tells the story best, which give them something to do. People care about different things. Don't make them care about the thing they don't care about. Help them do something about the thing they care about in as many ways as possible. So act locally, participate regionally. There's a place for politics and others, and you need to support that even if you don't have as much control over it. And then the missing one is, I call it insist internationally. Climate change is a good example of that. Overfishing is a good example of that. Ocean plastics is a good example of that. That's the community of nations having to collectively act, because if any one or group of them do not, you can make no progress. And all three of those are sort of gigantic commons problems. and on which we're not making nearly enough progress on any of them. And they come right back down to the villages that Lydia was talking about, and it's not us. So that last one I want to emphasize because in each of these examples, it's us negatively impacting someone far away. In fact, these three issues are the only three I'm aware of where we're doing something bad, but it's not bad to us. And so there's a moral dimension to this that's at the heart of conservation as well. And it's the hardest ones for people to organize around. So, you can have all kinds of views on these topics, but you can't have an alternative view that there's something bad being done to somebody else who's much less well off than we are, who's going to be the victim of that. And we have to control for it. So that would be the one that still deeply troubles me, and around which we have a lot more to do.
Yeah. As we sit here and we come out of the pandemic, and we think about how globally we're connected, and we think about, I feel like everyone will be much more, or is much more, aware of our natural resources and the things and the decisions we make, with the effect they have on those. So talk to me a little bit about how you see as we move from out of the pandemic into what was, how things are going to change. Is there going to be a greater appreciation for our natural resources in this big global world that we live in? I mean, what do you see, for the future here?
Yeah. So I definitely see things that the workplace, I think, is forever changed as far as freeing people to not be in an office 5 days a week. And I think that's going to have significant impact on reduced emissions and healthy lifestyles, connection to nature, the ability to get out and walk on a trail during lunch and have that access and that communion with nature, if you will. So I definitely see the workplace changing, but also we've heard a lot both at the state level and nationally, more from architecture and development firms of what they're doing as the population grows, both in the urban centers and in large, multi-occupancy buildings, et cetera. And I think we're going to see more and more nature integrated into that, reusable materials. So they're going to be built in smarter, better ways. And I think that being at home and loosely connected with the broader world, but more connected than ever before at the same time, has changed the way some of us are thinking and has helped some of us embrace new ways of dialogue, new ways of listening to what's going on, new ways of interpreting data, and again, new ways of interacting with our employers and our communities, and has helped us appreciate that. And so I think that those things are forever changed, and the way that collaboration works is going to continue to evolve, and I think that there is more openness to this than ever before, which is exciting to see because, as you mentioned, that last international piece and the people that we're impacting far off are the last ones that we're thinking of. I look to see that changing in the next 5, 10, 20 years because our children have experienced a world that we never did. And it's forever changed the way they're going to solve problems and the way they're going to work together so that they don't live through another pandemic.
Yeah, let me speak to this a little close to home to what I'm doing, which is this pandemic accelerated something that was already happening, but it has to do with this digital divide that I mentioned, which is we are now practiced in the ability to interact remotely or from our homes, and we're practiced in that and comfortable where that works and doesn't work. I think humans still want to be together. So I think we're going to go back to a lot of that. But it also gave folks an appreciation they could be someplace else. They could be out in the world. So I think cities are really eco-efficient if they're well designed. So cities aren't a bad thing. But also being able to go out and work and thrive in smaller communities where you have more custody and control over your conservation capability. We can now empower that with a very, very light footprint. A fiber that moves photons around is a really light footprint. It's even lighter than copper wires. And so for us in the developed world who can afford that, we can get a real leap forward. Then in the developing world, getting the infrastructure to the developing world, there's just a lot of people who want to be like other people. And the more folks who are suffering under the burden of really bad environments, if you've been to any of them, I have, it's really bad. Being able to visibly see people like you in another part of the world who are not burdened by that is the most powerful political activism that you can initiate. Because wait, I want that. I want that. They're in California and that air is crystal clear. Why don't I have that? So closing the digital divide is so important to initiating a demand of those least powerful to their most powerful to do something about it. And that's what's missing right now. That's why you don't get the insistence, because there's not that sense that this is not fair. Why am I bearing this burden and others are not? And the people that are supposed to represent me can do something about it. So that digital divide is really, really important. Really, really important. So don't beat up on the tech companies too much. We need them to bring this capability to the world, and it's just as important for conservation as it is for social welfare.
Yeah, definitely. One thing we didn't discuss a whole lot when we were doing our prep, but I'd be interested to kind of talk about it now. When we think about the ocean exhibit and we were talking about the plastics and the overfishing and, of course, climate change, the water's heating up. And so, there's a lot of folks that say that, we can do everything we want to do here, and unless certain countries change different things and the way they're conducting their operations, that it doesn't, what does it matter? And I can give my personal that it absolutely matters that the United States is a leader in this, but I'd be curious just, any deeper thoughts y'all have on this topic, because you do hear that a lot, and people get discouraged, and when you talk about kind of staying power and adjusting someone's mindset to taking care of the environment, if they think that their actions aren't going to really make a difference because there's so many other bigger things that are dwarfing it. So how do we communicate? Because I imagine I'm not the only one that hears that. Yeah. So.
Well, I think that Jim shared a couple of key data points earlier. Just the amount of energy that all of our smartphones are using each day. We can absolutely make a difference here in the United States, considering every single one of us uses one every single day. And I think even broader, looking at the data points of water that we're going to need as population grows, the food and how food is produced and the impact of that on the world, I think that there's a lack of information, and it ties back to your public education question, in that if someone truly feels that you can't make a difference in the United States, that's a failure on our part as leaders to get the information across, because we all can absolutely make a difference in our everyday life and then in the circle that we have influence over. And I think it's partly making that data and information available in a digestible way that shows that impact to, again, Jim alluded to this, to the one world and all of the ramifications there.
Yeah, so if you think about our role vis-a-vis the rest of the world, a big chunk of the rest of the world is still struggling to come out of poverty.
Yeah.
And they'll bear a lot of burden to come out of poverty and then become educated. Okay, so that's always going to be a priority. And so when we have these big items, whether it's climate change or overfishing or some of these things, it's going to be, it's extremely hard, and it would be no criticism of the George W. Bush administration or the Obama administration or the Biden administration of no ability to get a treaty on this stuff. And so to me, you got to keep trying. That's the insistence part, and we should do it, and we should keep trying to do it. But at the same time, you got to run a parallel path of good old-fashioned competition. And if we are cleaning the world's clock on the development of clean energy innovation, and if we're cleaning the world's clock on new transportation modalities, and if we're cleaning the world's clock on new forms of architecture and happier people, and that information's getting out, our counterparties are going to have to respond. And I was actually really intrigued, because the Republicans are still struggling with the issue of climate change. But Leader McCarthy added a phrase to his most recent statement. He actually gave a speech on climate change, which is awesome. It's great. But he added this phrase that energy needs to be affordable, of course, reliable, of course. And then he said clean energy needs to be exportable. Okay, a big bridge was just put up. A big bridge, which is, we can certainly find common ground that our leadership in developing the next generation technology is something we can do really well by then exporting that technology and the services that go with it. But you do have to be willing to do the smart mandates, as I mentioned, because people have to invest in this stuff, and to invest in it, they have to know that it has meaning in your society such that it can be delivered globally. But that was a big movement. Because, by the way, it'll freak you out, but something like 90% of the world's population now has a smartphone. Yeah. But half of that 90% has a dumb smartphone because they don't have the digital infrastructure. They can't do with it what you want to do with it that we enjoy. But that's a pretty big deal, that there's this device, this information machine that's sitting in the hands of most people in the world today. So how do we tap into that for good? Quick aside, you cannot be complacent and think that owning the information produces an outcome. And so the other thing that frustrates me is the sort of virtuous posting, and I get a lot of it, of people that think by posting they've done something. Okay, so we all have to be good moms and pops, and assure all of those younger than us that simply saying you care about something doesn't mean anything happens as a result of that. And I think that's a big hazard in our information-obsessed world.
Yeah, true. So you're both amazing leaders in the field of conservation and the environment. So I'm curious, because we've got just a couple of minutes left, and I want to make sure that you impart on our audience, I guess, what gets you excited about the future in this area, and then what, we've talked about every single sector, but to individuals and folks that own businesses, what can they do? What are the things that they can do? So Joni, you want to start?
Sure. So I think what gets me excited is really what I've shared, the collaborations that I'm seeing that have just exponentially risen in the last 3 years. So in Texas, we get a bad rap because we're 95% privately owned from a land perspective, but we're seeing more and more collaboration between ranchers and private landowners and industry and government organizations and non-government organizations. And that's exciting to me because that's the sweet spot for innovation. When we're each bringing our own unique blend of leadership and intelligence and expertise, that's where you leapfrog. That's where you get to the next level. So that gets me really excited. The initiatives that I mentioned, Lights Out, Texas Water Action Collaborative, Dark Skies, those are big, far-reaching projects that are happening in Texas, but also pushing into national as well. And as far as what this audience, which by the way, thank you all for caring about conservation and our natural resources, but if you would do one thing in leaving here, I hope that there's something that myself or Jim mentioned tonight that is sticking in your mind. And I invite you to just think, what if? What if I applied that when I went home? What if I applied that to the business that I run? What if I apply that to the conservation group that I work with or the board that I sit on? What if I look at and just back up and say people, process, product, place, what can we do differently? Then you're going to start the change right where you're leading and right where you are, which is incredibly exciting to see because there are opportunities on the ground level, just turn out your lights at night, to big, far-reaching initiatives. And I invite you to say what if and make that change and partner with someone to get it done.
Jim?
So I'll tell you what excites me, but I have to do a little lead into it. Mrs. Bush glibly said something earlier today that will no longer be glib for all of you. So I want you to repeat after me. You're going to repeat 4 things after me, then we're going to put it all together. So Papa. Hana. Moku. Akea. Ready? Papa, Hana, Moku, Akea. The fact that you all know about a place called Papa, Hana, Moku, Akea, and that there's a story to that place, there's a history to that place, and there's a conservation movement that has taken over the world as a result of that place, gets me really excited.
and anything you want to impart. That's wonderful. Yeah, wonderful. Well, I want to thank you both. I want to thank Mrs. Bush. I want to thank Lyda Hill for tonight. We have all learned many things, and we will all now know how to say, I'm going to need some remedial up here. Special thanks to Highland Capital Management for being the presenting sponsor of the Engage at the Bush Center series. Save the date for our next Engage program on June 14th. We will continue the Bush Institute's ongoing conversation on the need for immigration reform. This time with a focus on the border. Guests will include former Congressman Will Hurd, along with Adair Margot, Jay Clayburgh, and former Mexican Ambassador to the United States, Geronimo Gutierrez Fernandez. Evan Smith of the Texas Tribune will moderate. On your way out tonight, please be sure and stop by the museum to see the newly updated exhibit that we talked about tonight, and be sure to take a turn on the Ocean Explorer simulator that Lyda spoke about. Thank you so much for joining us, and good night.